everyone. Thanks for coming, especially early. Bye. Okay. So we're here from New York Presbyterian, as Andy said, and we're going to talk. We changed the title a little bit, so you may have noticed that it's a little bit different. But we're here to talk about how we've embedded Tableau and visualizations into workflow, into clinical workflow. So I am the Director of Analytics at NYP on the consulting side, so I'm the primary liaison between the IT group and then also the clinical, between the IT and the clinical and business side. So Craig and Aaron are both much more technical than I am, so they'll be able to answer those questions at the end. And then do you guys want to both just quickly say your role with the hospital?
Okay. Yes, I'm Aaron Lehman, and I'm an information systems specialist on the same team as Kim, and I work with the emergency department primarily, but mostly I am back making stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I am Craig Budzinski. I'm a technical specialist. I'm also in the stuff-making business, and I manage our Tableau server instance.
Okay, I'll see. All right, so just quickly what we're going to talk about today is we're going to give a little overview about our organization, what challenges we face on a regular basis with data and analytics, and how we're solving those by going through a couple of case studies, one with the nursing group and then another with the ED group. Then we're going to talk about sort of what that means in terms of user experience and how that really, how we help to improve that. And then we're going to go a little bit into a deeper dive about how we technically did it. Okay, so who we are. Quick show of hands, who is from a healthcare provider here? Oh, great. Okay, so a lot of you guys probably know us, New York Presbyterian. We're in New York. We have a couple other folks here from our institution as well. We're an academic medical center. We have 6 main campuses. The organization as a whole also has some regional hospitals and physician groups as well. We're affiliated with 2 medical schools, Columbia and Cornell. We have some folks from both of those here as well. We have 2,600 inpatient beds, so we're quite large. We are the second largest employer in the state of New York behind the government. So just to give you a sense of how large our user size is, 20,000 employees, and we see about 2 million visits annually. And then a little plug for our ranking. Okay, so what do we do as an analytics team? So our group supports all of the analytics, pretty much anything data for the organization. We do the architecture underneath, so we do our data modeling. We do the data delivery itself, so whether it's a report, dashboard, Excel, clinical research, whatever. And we have some data scientists on our team that do more of the insight gathering or insight delivery. We have applications, so we have an engineering team that does a lot of sort of development on that side. So if you want to push data to a mobile device, have a notification, things like that. We also do governance for the hospital. At a hospital that size, you need some sort of governance structure. And then data quality. So we work very closely with the departments within the hospital to make sure that the data that they are seeing is what they expect, and whether or not that means that, kind of a feedback loop with the clinical applications and the operations team. So that's just sort of a summary. On the picture on your right is just to kind of show all the different groups. This is just probably 20% of the departments that we serve. So we do everything from the clinical, financial, anyone that's involved in ACOs or district, meaningful use, all of those programs, we service all of those as well. Okay, so at a place this large with a group that serves this many different people, we have to really think about what each group faces as far as challenges on a day-to-day basis. So it's not just I need data faster, it's I need data from all these different places. We have more than one EMR in our organization, so and our EMR is different from our ADT system. So how do we know which patient is which? How do the end users feel comfortable and trust the data that they're getting? We have, it's coming from everywhere. And then also, how do we help people, and this is sort of more the focus of the talk, is how do we help people dig through all that information? Like I said, we see 2 million patients annually. We have 6 different campuses. Multiple EMRs are, even between the different campuses that are on the same EMR, the workflow between the EMRs is a little bit different. So You could be on one campus and, you open one document to write something about a patient, and then on the other campus, the document is the same but has a different name, or it's a different document. So that's sort of the challenge that we're trying to help solve, is how to help providers go through that information and how to really bring to the forefront what's important so they don't spend their time hunting and pecking, digging through the EMR. That's not their job. They're clinicians, okay? All right, so this is I kind of jumped the gun on this. So so the two goals of what we wanted to achieve and what we're going to talk about today is how to increase the visibility of the actionable information. So how do we bring to the forefront the stuff that matters from that huge EMR? And then how do we make it easier for clinicians to actually do something about it? So data is great, but if you can't do anything with it, or if it takes too long, or if it's after the fact and whatever, it loses the value tremendously as the distance between the data and the action grows. Okay. So Aaron is going to talk about what that means a little bit in terms of the ED. Oh, actually, yeah. You need to click.
Thank you, Kim. So again, we are a large institution, and in Manhattan we have
Sorry.
In Manhattan we have 4 emergency departments. The Allen Hospital, 168 and Broadway, Columbia Universal Medical Center, Weill Cornell, and Lower Manhattan. And these are relatively high volume EDs, most notably Columbia, which has about 400 patients a day. And the time can get a little bit hectic and it's difficult. People are kind of counting the seconds, and they want to get rid of as many clicks as possible when it comes to documenting patients, and they want to be able to best find patients throughout the organization relatively quickly. This is the application that we use for the EHR at our emergency departments, and it's perfectly good if you want to get a list of patients, and if you want to see what each major issue with each of the patients are, but it is a list of patients. And if you want to do any kind of sorting to find a particular cohort or a particular type of patient, or to get a status on a group of patients, it's rather difficult because you have to click, 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 click across the top, sort, sort, sort. It's a bit meddlesome. So we worked actively with each one of the emergency departments to sort out exactly what would be the most convenient aggregate counts of patients to improve general workflow throughout the ED. And this is what we came up with. Just to walk through it very quickly, the first column here is just total number of patients in each part of the ED, grouped by district waiting room, obviously. But you can do that to customize it to the issue, to the ED that you're dealing with. And then the number of beds in that area, certified beds, number of available beds, that's an arbitrary number. Obviously, you can put people in vertical units or cots or whatever, depending on your volume. People coming in the last hour that are in that area to show if a particular area is getting oversurged. And then you can provide resources if necessary. MSE is basically waiting to be seen by a physician. So you can see how many people are kind of in that middle stage. And then people that are waiting to be discharged, waiting to be admitted in the hospital. So you can basically say the process in the ED is relatively complete, but there is some more action needs to be taken before they actually leave. And then across the bottom, we have a 72-hour, 30-day readmits, which is useful because then you can see if there's an issue with a repetitive sort of incident with them. And then different aggregates of the process for admitting or discharging. So again, yeah, so what you're looking at then is you're looking at a whole group as a number, which is extremely convenient because you wouldn't have to click, you wouldn't have to scroll, and you can see this in one place. And then with these items across the bottom, you're looking at specific underlying data. You'd have to go into the documents, you'd have to do a variety of other things in order to sort that stuff out. But Tableau allows us to bring it right to the front and make this available, which is why we are installing this screen on flat screens throughout all of the EDs and providing it as kind of like an overview so that people can see, you know, the overall status of things, if there's a particular busy area, if they could relocate resources, et cetera, et cetera. It's been quite helpful. It provides a home screen for decision making. It gives anyone who's looking at it a direct sense of the population of the ED at that time. And again, it aggregates and gives drill through to patient details. So this is the other thing. If you are looking at the flat screens, you can see the first piece. But if you're actually on a console with the EHR, there is a button that they can click, bring this up on their local machine, click on the number, and get that list of patients with pertinent information about that particular step of the process. So on this example, you're looking at area C. Here are the 20 patients. This is how long that they've been in the hospital. Have they seen a doctor? Are they being waited to be discharged, et cetera? Yes? This is done manually in the system, but we have implemented a couple of other strategies, most particularly using scribes to shadow the clinicians. So the stuff is being entered pretty much real time. There's maybe a 1-2 minute lag, really. But yeah, so the idea here is that you can make most of your decisions here and then pop back into the application once you know what your next step is. And this is much easier to deal with. Throughout the entire process of a patient coming into the ED, from triage to initial examination to full examination to whether or not they're going to be admitted or discharged, I said conservatively we save about 4 clicks on each step. Sometimes it's significantly more. Sometimes it's a little bit more inherent if they're like a high ESI1 or ESI2, like if it's a high incident patient, they need to have special attention. But in general, I would say conservatively speaking, this saves about 4 or 5 clicks on each step of the decision-making process, which gives you around 21,400 clicks a day. But I think the most important part of this is the fact that now you can actually get a good overview of the whole piece. It gives you a good place to start. It doesn't matter when you're coming in. It doesn't matter who you are. There's something in there. So if you are looking for the next thing you need to do as an individual in the ED, you can start at this piece. And with all of these features, and most particularly the ones over on the right, the surge alert, the overview of the zone, and the nursing capacity, these are things that weren't really available in the EHR package at all. So that's basically an overview. Does anybody have any questions? It's all scripts. Yes. Precisely. Yeah, it's under the tools menu. And actually, the next piece that we're doing is also the same way. But I don't want to take that away. So actually, I'm going to give it back to Kim, and she's going to talk about the nursing component piece that we did that uses a similar methodology.
I'm good with it. Okay, so with the ED, we had a lot of patients that need to be seen at a very, pretty quick interval. I need to know what's important about which one and sort of what your volume's like, right? With nursing, we need to know a lot of detailed information about specific patients. So, as I mentioned, the EMR is pretty big. There's a lot of stuff in it. You go to different places for different things. Different campuses have different document names, yada, yada. But the stuff that's in the EMR is really important, so you need to be able to get there, right? So there are, we're going to highlight 4 of the quality measures that nursing in our hospital really cares about. They are obviously, it's clinical care. You want to improve clinical care, and quality of care, but also it directly feeds NDNQI, Press-Ganey. We're going to try for magnet status, so and obviously our hospital rankings. So there are a lot of external sources that care about this data as well. So the nurses, with that, they're faced with a few things. One, each nurse has a lot of patients. 2, each patient is a little bit different. You don't know necessarily what's important about each patient just by looking at the home page of the EMR. And then you have hundreds of observations that they're making each day and documenting, and well, not hundreds, but probably over the course of the visit, hundreds of orders that they're placing for the patient, whether it's to have a catheter in, whether it's for a medication, whatever. So there's a lot of stuff to sift through that the nurses have to go through in order to help improve, the falls with injury, et cetera. So how do you help them with that? What we did was we made a Tableau dashboard out of our EMR data that brings essentially in list format that's based on unit, which is how nurses really kind of see patients. They're pretty unit-based. A nurse is assigned to a unit, not necessarily to a service or a room. So by unit, you can see the patients and which ones have particular clinical indicators that lead to CLABSI, CAUDI, falls with injury, et cetera. So there's clinical evidence that if you have a catheter in for a certain number of days or more than, the longer you have one in, the more likely you are to have a catheter-associated UTI. So we want to know who has a catheter in, who has a Foley order, right? Then, what's the next one? So same thing with lines. If you have a line, you have a higher rate or higher chance of having an infection if the line is in longer, or if you haven't done the bath for it, et cetera. Falls, same thing, high risk. The nurses document fall risk in the EMR. I think it's once a day or so. Anyways, so we want to know, if you have a higher risk of falling, you probably will fall, so we want to know who those patients are. And then, so what this does is that so you don't have to unpack and see, all right, I want to know all my patients with a catheter in. It just tells you right there. I want to know all my patients with a catheter in have high fall risk and have had lines in. Those patients are probably going to require a little bit more attention, so maybe our nurse staffing needs to shift a little bit to account for that percentage of patients in your unit. So that's what we did with this. In addition to bringing it to the forefront, obviously it reduces clicks. You don't have to click through the EMR to find your different patients that have a line in, et cetera. You don't have to click through everything, create a filter to see catheter orders and then see, all right, this patient has a catheter order, this one doesn't. You can just look at the dashboard. Let's see. All right, and then I guess we're talking about outcomes now.
Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about what the end result looks like. So far, we've basically been covering the back end, which in my opinion is where 95% of the value is. It's that we're consolidating this huge corpus of data that someone would have to search all over the place for and provide that to the nurses or the clinicians. But what we're going to go over a bit more is how we're integrating it into the workflow. I'm sure you're all familiar with, in healthcare, how much people don't want to sign into another system, and then when they do sign into that other system, it's really hard to take what you find there and bring it back to where you have to take action on that. So this is us in our EMR, and you'll see you just go up to the Tools menu, select the tool, and this is for the nursing dashboard. Just launches in a little pop-up window. From there, you find a patient that you want to work with, and when you click, just ask if you want to change, and you'll see behind, it actually changed the patient that you're in the record. And when we were working on this project, it sort of felt lackluster when I took the video, and I was like, actually, that's the point. It's that this is a process that, if you really add it up, would take a massive amount of time for a clinician to dig through all of that data and find who is that patient that they want to work on, and then eventually go to that patient's record and do something with them. So what we're looking at with outcomes for it is we're trying to make it so that there's more visibility of the information that you need to take action on. And we do that through the consolidation of the data, of going in there and making sure that we're pulling it in directly. In the emergency department, this, along with other initiatives, has contributed towards a reduction in wait times from over an hour and 15 minutes down to less than half an hour. I saw on the bus last night how frustrated people got waiting for about 20 minutes to go to a party. I can't imagine being in an emergency room and really needing care and having to wait that extra time. So that is a massive change for our patients. some of the outcomes from that is we have half the rate of people that are leaving our hospital before having care provided in the emergency department. And it's really allowing us to really provide our vision and make it so that we're actually caring for patients. I know you see articles on a regular basis in healthcare about how technology is great, but it's making it so that I'm not actually able to care for my patient, and I'm not spending time with them. And we're trying to reduce those barriers and make it so that we're moving on to a new cycle of technology that has the advantages of not having to look through paper records, but also isn't clunky and feels good in your hand to work with and work through with your patients. Overall, we are also trying to reduce the number of clicks and just remove that friction. We're doing that with the integration, which we'll go through in a little bit here. But when we were trying to quantify this with Andy before the conference, it blew our mind when we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we quantify this? And we started adding up the clicks and estimating how much time does that take, and annually we're looking at it hopefully adding up to around 38,000 man-hours saved, which is insane. I really sort of couldn't believe it when we started adding things up.
I actually double-checked it. I thought, that can't be right.
Yeah. So it's just really interesting to see that. And all of this work also bleeds over into other areas. It's going into our accreditation and certifications. These are the types of things that make it so that JCAHO and Magnet are easy for us. It goes into the hospital rankings when you're talking about US News World Report, or whether it's UHC or any other of the ones out there. And big right now with the shifts in the healthcare industry with value-based care. And if we're talking about the ACO or Accountable Care Organization or a New York district, it's a huge impact to our bottom line. And everyone's looking at this right now of how do we stay ahead of the curve on a lot of these issues. And then the other thing is what Aaron was talking about, of giving this bird's eye view. For me, it's about Tableau making it so that we have this versatility that wasn't available before. Medical record systems do a really good job of certain things, but they don't do all things. And so having this added layer that integrates really nicely allows people to think differently about how they want to look at things in different situations and be able to have that embedded directly into the workflow when, with how the EMR is built, it can't be done there. And it needs to be done through some other software. Yeah.
Are you using the time savings as a return on investment?
In what way?
Like justification for the technology spend?
No, we didn't, that wasn't part of our sort of requirements. It's just a bonus.
Are they using that to reduce headcount then, or just reallocating?
Reallocating resources, yeah. And with the nursing especially, so there's staffing, appropriate staffing, and sort of nurse utilization is really getting more and more important, especially as we need to cut costs, et cetera. And so we're trying to, that's primarily for that, at least where it's going, is to make sure that the distribution is more appropriate, not that we're cutting nursing, but that the distribution is consistent with where the need is.
Yeah, so we're working with our partners, and obviously we really care about not only the quantitative aspect, but the qualitative of, is this a tool that people are actually enjoying working with? But what we're gonna go through next is how we did this. It'll be relatively high level, but what we're gonna focus on is the piece that's applicable to all of you. So whether you have, EMR A, B, or C, that's not what we wanna go over with you guys here. We wanna go over how do you integrate that in a general sense, and working with the JavaScript API to make it so that that is a seamless workflow. And it's pretty straightforward, honestly. The first major step is all of the server stuff that you need to do. That means that you have to look in your EHR and your Tableau server instance and make sure that you're whitelisting all of the servers that need to communicate with each other so that they can do the proper security authentication. From there, you're working to set up your security. For us, we manage our credentials through Active Directory, and so there's trusted authentication with Tableau Server, and figuring out how to send those messages back and forth and get the tokens for security. The main thing behind that is you could use some service accounts for it, but for us, we also want that auditing and logging. We want to know who's going in and when they're going in, looking at the volumes of who's accessing this information. And then from there, you just test it. Make sure that everything's doing exactly what you want it to from a security standpoint. From there, with the JavaScript, you have to look at the data first and make sure that you have mirrored data across the board. For us, that means that in the EHR, we have a field that is MRN, or medical record number, and that the values are formatted in the same way that they are in your Tableau workbook. Once you have that, you then, it's honestly pretty straightforward. You create listeners that are looking for basically your column header, and then they're also looking for that there's a non-null value in that field. And then you can pass that back in. For us, we're then making a SQL call within the EHR that instead of someone opening up two windows side by side and what is that 7-digit number again and typing it in, and then you're in the patient, now you need to go to the visit, you just click and it goes directly and passes it right over. For us, what we're aiming at next is right now we have one-way communication. We're going from Tableau back into our EHR. And what we're trying to do next is to have two-way communication and maybe have something where if you're on a medical record within the EHR, having the dashboard automatically filter to that patient when you go there, or any other context-specific things. We're also looking for specific workflow actions. Our request from the users was to just shift the MRN, change the patient that we're on. But we hopefully want to get to a point where if you are working with, let's say, someone who has, if you click on, let's say, catheters, that it goes to the nurse's orders. And if you click on pressure ulcers, then it's going to go to the flow sheets for you within the medical record system. And then hopefully we want to get even further than that into context specific. So it's not about whether you're looking at catheters, you're also looking at what is the indication for that catheter to say, in this instance, we need to go to orders because someone needs to fill that out. And the other is we need to go to the flow sheets to see what are the fluid in and outs for the catheter and start investigating from there. And then here are a few links for you guys of where this information is. Tableau's pretty good with their documentation on this stuff. And they also have really good GitHubs if you want to go really, really deep down the rabbit hole. And so that is it. Yeah.
First and foremost, thank you for an compelling presentation.
Yeah.
Questions from the audience?
For your reports in Tableau, do you have different roles that see different views of the same report, or do you have the same report available on?
So we're managing that.
Repeat the question.
Yeah, so he was asking about whether we have different views based upon either whether it's security permissions or whether we have role-based permissions within Tableau Server. We're currently not doing that, mainly because we're managing that through the front end and which selections you make within the EHR. So there's two separate selections, one for the emergency department and one for the nursing dashboard. Also with that is the applications that these are, and from a security perspective, anyone who has access to our medical record system is not seeing anything new in these dashboards. It's all data that's available to them. We're just putting it in one spot. So we have no security issues as far as that's concerned. If we do start talking about different use cases, we're going to either end up having questions where do we make it so that the selection menu is dynamic, or do we have to think about how we pass those credentials through? Personally, I think a dynamic menu makes more sense, mainly because we don't want people clicking on an item and it doesn't work because of their security permissions. So, yeah.
How many resources and man-hours do it take to set up that?
So are you talking about the JavaScript API specifically, or the dashboards as well?
Creating both Tableau and your data.
Yeah. So his question was, how many man hours did it take for the JavaScript integration between the two?
And resources.
If you consolidated everything, I would say it probably took us 3 or 4 weeks. But a lot of that was waiting because you have to wait on it going into production, the whitelisting of the servers, entering tickets with with the host and all of those things. It really extends how long it actually takes from a time perspective. Me and one other guy. Yeah, so it was 2 people, and basically the main thing was I handled all of the Tableau piece, and it was sort of like playing Mad Libs with his C# code, where I was filling in the blanks of what was needed. And then he was in charge of the back end, and the reason we didn't talk about the back end on the EHR side is that's really custom to your instance, and what we did is not what you're going to do. So, yeah. No. So he's asking if Tableau's directly hitting our EHR's data. No, so it's coming from our enterprise data warehouse. But so one thing I did skip is that the MRN is actually a slightly different format. So when we make that query back, we throw in a few spaces, but it's relatively simple.
Real time.
So it depends on the data source. So some data sources are coming daily, some are on a few-hour lag, other things are relatively real time.
The nursing one is, the data source is real time and it's updating the dashboard real time, but we have the refresh on the Tableau side set to be, I think, every 2 hours just because of
It's
the
every
wait.
1 hour.
Or every 1 hour just because of how much it takes to run it, and nurses only look at it usually once an hour, so. But the data is available real time, we could have made it faster. if we
Yeah, and
wanted.
the emergency department one is
2 minutes?
technically.
It's the max is 5 minutes.
Yeah.
5-minute lag.
And we're actually using a secondary layer of the JavaScript API for that one to purge the cache, because we don't want to reconfigure the whole server for how it manages caches for something that's updating that frequently. But for the ED use case, because that's extremely fast moving. A catheter, you enter an order, you know what you did, you look at it an hour, it's refreshed, it's fine. But if you're talking about the ED, I mean, that's very different. You have 2 patients who just left, we have 2 free beds, let's get them there. So.
What's the breadth of data? How much data are you storing?
I actually haven't looked at that much. Aaron would know much
Every-
more.
I was
on
going to say,
patient.
so the actual,
So the entire data warehouse, or
Well, your reports are looking at a certain amount of data, and if you're looking at data records for 2 or 3 years or whatever, it's
Mhm.
not gonna be readily quick.
that's true. That's very
Right,
true.
What's your breadth of data, what's your focus?
Yeah.
So-
I'm sorry.
Sorry, yeah, can I answer?
Yeah.
So, for these dashboards, because they're real time, they're patients that are in-house right now. It's just the folks that have, it's whatever's in the EMR right then for who's in-house. The warehouse goes back years and years. So, for things like readmission, obviously his has, whether or not that patient is a readmitted patient, so we know when their last visit was. If we wanted to tie back in, their LDL from their previous visit, we could. That just hasn't been part of the ask in these instances. But our other dashboards that aren't these real-time ones, have aggregated data from, like we have one for population health, that's all their visits over the past 18 months, whether or not they're at risk for certain things. So it just depends on the case study and the use case. Does that answer your question, or is that not quite?
I'm back to the meeting that
Who initiated these projects? Like, did this come from the C-suite or did the PR approach you? How did this get started?
Well, the question was, how did this get started? Who initiated the project? I've been working with the ED for around since 2010, developing reports, mostly initially, and standardizing metrics. But I was working with them, and they were like, the real problem, I was asking, like, really, what are your real stressors on your day-to-day basis? I can make you as many reports as you'd like, but is that really going to help you do what you do better? And they were like, and we developed these key metrics through that process, and the idea was like each one of these, when you click on any of these numbers, it's essentially a report under the number, but it's a report that is referring to exactly what the state of the system is right then. If you print a report, if you bring up a report on a screen, the second you bring it up, it's starting to get stale. The idea here is that you don't need to deal with that issue any longer. These are your aggregate numbers. Once it hits something that you're interested, click on the number, get what you need. So it was really a bottom-up approach on that.
And for the nursing one, the initial sort of reporting for nursing and these quality metrics was started about 2 years ago between our CIO and the chief nursing officer. They wanted to figure out how to help nurses do their job better. And then this real-time embedding came from our CEO. It may have come directly from the president of the hospital, actually. I think it came from Maura. So she wanted the nurse unit, something that's unit-based, something that everyone on the unit can look at real time. So that came up from her and sort of as an extension of what the previous work was done between the CIO and the chief nursing officer.
So the pain management in the cardiovascular context, which obviously is getting a lot of press.
Yeah.
That
was between the CIO and the chief nursing officer. Yeah, exactly. So that was sort of their baby, and this is an extension of that. We took that one step further. This is sort of the phase 2 from that.
question, yes?
Yeah, so we've been very hesitant to use Tableau as a real-time clinical decision support tool, just because of the inherent risk of the lag in the data and the risk with the ETL not happening completely or accurately and not reconciling to the operational database. So how do you guys think through those issues?
I think probably the biggest one as a backstop is, especially for the emergency room dashboard, is really thinking about the design. So it's very prominently displayed in the dashboard when it was last updated. So you can see if there has been something where the ETL process screwed up or whatever else, that you can see that lag in there and still have it be something that okay, maybe I need to check a little bit more. So that is a risk. For us, with most of the things that we build, we're not T0 or T1. We sort of live in the world of, we're the people who hopefully make it so that your job is very much so easier to do, but not that you cannot do your job if we're not there for you. So.
Other questions?
You talked a little about your real-time architecture. Are you getting to stagnant time?
Yep.
Well, for the ED items, we're just, the EHR is in SQL. It's on a T-SQL database, and we're using some sys packages to quickly replicate the data. We picked key items, and we tried to make the real-time element as streamlined as possible. I think the package takes maybe 15 seconds to run, which allows us to run it that frequently. So even if it does fail once, when it runs the next time, when it fails, it's not going to kill the table. And when it runs the next time, it'll refresh the data, which is why we put always the last refresh time in the lower right-hand corner, just so people are aware. But the idea is that we've got a staggered amount. We've got some items that get refreshed every 5 minutes. We've got some items that get refreshed every 4 hours. We have some items that get refreshed nightly, depending on the reporting requirement.
Yeah,
And
that's consistent with the other
Yep.
one.
You said you only have one-way context integration with Tableau, but how do you know which
So he's asking, how do we know what to display? What we're looking at with the ED is actually quite easy because it's campus specific. So if you're in the Columbia facility, that's all you're looking at. And the other ones really don't impact you. And so we actually, it's based off of your instance. And then we've also built a little bit of a layer on top of it so you can toggle between them if you want to. And that's more for management type views. With the nursing dashboard, just because nursing it's such a living animal. You know, a unit's under construction and they're in a different place. There's different unit mapping names. The governance piece of that is really hard. So what we've taken as what we do right now is we've taken a step back and we've said, here's a filter for you that you can choose your own unit because we don't want to mess that up for you. Especially if you're someone who manages multiple units.
Exactly.
I know that's one of the things, you may be a nursing director who cares about these 7 units or all of the ICUs, and making it so that we're not building a tool that only works for boots on the ground nurses who are in the unit. It works all the way up and all the way down. So.
Yeah, so it shows all, then you can filter.
Any additional questions?
Your JavaScript, is that hosted entirely on Tableau server, or do you have some kind of other middleware server that's hosted?
So he's asking if we have a middleware server that is managing the JavaScript. For the emergency room with the management of the cache, we actually do have a separate server that's managing that. For the integration with Eclipsys, or our medical record system, is we actually have it embedded into the database to make it mutable for ourselves. And then we're calling that data element as a C# script or as HTML JavaScript. It gives us a bit more flexibility, especially with our server vendor, but it's all hosted locally. That also helps us with, we have different instances of the medical record system depending on which campus you're on. And so it allows us to potentially launch different dashboards when we're getting closer to that point.
Any other questions? If not, I'd like to thank Kim, Aaron, and